the questions. Thanks for the introductions. And we're actually going to start back to the basics. Joe, this is a question for you. Let's start with defining certification, because there's formal, informal, there's people talking about testing, badging, accreditations, all sorts of terms and technologies in the world of certification. So can you define certification for us?
Yes, in a broader sense, certification is the validation of a particular set of skills or requirements. So it could be something like passing a test to get certified, or it could be certifying an organization as meeting ISO standards. So getting your driver's license is a form of certification. So it's a formal process. Sometimes you hear the term legally defensible, which means it adheres to certain standards. There's also non-legally defensible certification. Accreditation, I know I was guilty of this in a prior company. We used accreditation for what we would call the lighter certifications. Micro-cert would be a better term nowadays, but really an accreditation is what you would give an institution. So we were misusing the term. Badging we'll talk a little more about later on, but what was the other thing, Sarah?
Just maybe talk a little bit just quickly about, there's the term certification, but is that formal, informal? What does testing mean?
Okay, certification typically involves testing and or meeting a set of standards. So it's formal. It can be informal as well. I hate to say it could be whatever you want it to be, because there's so many different uses of the term, but traditionally in the IT space, which is where I've lived for the past 30 years, certification has been a formal process by which you validate a set of skills, either by taking a test with items, multiple choice questions, or performing tasks hands-on in a laboratory environment to demonstrate mastery.
Sarah, I'll just say, I'm glad you asked this question, because as Joe indicated, this is one of the hardest things to figure out, is what are you going to call this thing you're going to do? Because certification means one thing. Joe, I'm guilty of the accred. I've heard that before, but I told our sales enablement people, you have to call them accreditations. You can't call them certifications. So it is almost anything you want, but one of the things that we may or may not talk about is that you need to really define the terms you're going to use within your company to make sure that the people who are looking for skills to identify that workforce know what you're talking about. If you say certification, what does that mean? If you say qualification, if you say whatever word, accreditation. So it is an excellent question, because certification means something different to many, to almost everybody who mentions it, is what I find.
Awesome. And we're going to dig into why we would make certain decisions around that in a minute, and also talk about different audiences or types of learners that need to certify or get tested. So we'll dig into all of that. Before we get there, so that's a great ad, Liz, digital badging. There's a lot of talk now in the industry about digital badging, or I need a badge. What does that mean?
I think that's an excellent question for Joe, because he's gotten involved in this a little bit more than I have, but I'll just key you up, Joe, because you've taught me about this. Again, a badge is, digital badging is one of those words that to some people it means the icon that you present on your Facebook, and to some people it means the recognition of accomplishment or achievement of passing the test or a set of criteria. Did I cue you up well, Joe, for that?
Yeah. I would say, when I first think of digital badging, I think of the 21st century version of a PDF certificate, which was the 20th century version of an old paper certificate when you passed an exam. At Kinaxis, we primarily use digital badges well, we still have PDF certificates, but we give them out for people that pass our certification exams. We also have badges for internal accomplishments, like if somebody gets a patent or wins a service award or something like that. So as Liz stated, a badge is just an icon. What's nicer about a badge over a PDF certificate is it has metadata in it, which means you can validate the information on the badge to make sure it's not somebody just creating an image, putting it up there. The metadata will tell you when the badge was issued, what it took to issue it, if it's valid, and for how long, who the issuing body was, what the path was to get there, and what skills are associated with the badge. So it's kind of like a resume for the credential. If you say you get a bachelor's degree, you get a diploma, I've got my degree, great. What does that mean? Well, same with a PDF certificate. But with a digital badge, it tells you exactly what the badge means and represents. So badges can be issued for certifications, achievements, completion of a course, perfect attendance. They're just fancy stickers, but they're electronic and they contain metadata and generally have more representation and meaning than, let's say, a sticker would.
And I'm going to add that in my opinion, that when digital badges came out, which was maybe 10 or so years ago, they're not new anymore, but when they came out, they were a game changer. Joe, would you agree? They were a game changer for certification because now there was an easy way to, one, ensure that the person had a valid certification. They weren't able to kind of copy a PDF and hand that in, but it also scaled the ability to validate certifications and the ability to take away a certification designation when somebody let their certification expire. So I would argue that nobody wants a certification program without the capability of issuing a digital badge, which the last thing I didn't mention is it appears on Facebook profiles. So it does marketing for you to raise awareness of your certification because people post it. So they were, to me, they were game changers in the industry when they came out.
Oh, definitely. We started doing badging in an informal way in 2015 or 2016 when we launched our program, but we went to Credly in 2019 and we did a formal badge program at that point. But as we had talked about prior, the fact that you said badges also led to gamification, which is one use. Also with the verification, in the old days, if we would get recruiters or somebody looking for a job and wanting to verify certification records, they're confidential. So we had to get written releases from the candidates. Nowadays, a candidate posts their badge and recruiters can go out and click on the badge and validate it immediately. So in that regard, it's made the recruiting process, the job search process a lot easier because you can direct somebody to your badge wallet and show them everything you've got.
And Liz, I was going to ask this. So you mentioned posting it to Facebook, LinkedIn. Digital badges typically will live, you know, does it live in your email, your signature? Digital badge can go there too?
It's a URL, so you can put it anywhere you want. Often, okay, it's been a couple of years since I did this, but I know at Adobe we struggled because the digital badges didn't fit very well in the signature, and we were trying to work on that. But that was a several years ago problem that might have been solved now. But it's good to be able to allow them to be in an email signature for your candidates.
Awesome. I want a digital badge for perfect attendance. Does that happen? You mentioned that, Joe.
It can.
Kidding. Okay, awesome. So now we've defined certification a little bit, accreditation, testing, badging. An important question I get often as I'm working with companies is, when should a training organization or a company consider having testing or certification? And then how do they understand how to build out the requirements? How do they know where to start?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that, and I'm going to kind of hopefully not pontificate a little bit on my beliefs here, but the first thing I would say, Sarah, is if it's the training organization that wants to launch the certification program, that's a problem. What you want is the organization to need a certification program. And in the way that I think about it, or for me, when people say I want a certification program and you say, okay, well, why and for whom? What I'm trying to hear is that the primary goal is to benefit our customers by allowing them to be identify people either working for a partner or that they want to hire or that they're upskilling in their own organization. They want a standards-based tool for identifying a known set of knowledge and skills. And it is all about the customer. So in the certification program for Appian, we are driven by that. And that's not marketing speak. That is everything that we do. The first question we ask is, okay, does that help our customer identify who they need to work on their Appian product? So in reality, I mean, we have many stakeholders, right? Joe, we've got the engineering organization who wants to drive feature adoption. We have the partner organization that wants to drive partner stuff. We've got the marketing organization, and they're all valid stakeholders. But when those stakeholders come to me and say, I want a certification program, or when I go and say, we need a certification program, to me, the first conversation is around how that will help our customers. And then from there, you have conversations about, okay, well, who is it for? Who do we need to certify? Why do we need to certify them? And then you use that information to kind of determine, well, how big is this audience? How much scale do I have to have? How complex are the skill sets, which lead to how complex your certification framework is going to be, which, as Joe knows, is the most complicated thing to figure out, is that whole framework. It'll help you understand if it needs to be legally defensible or can be more informal or casual. It helps you understand if you need scale, which becomes part of the conversation between whether I'm a multiple choice based test or I'm a performance based test. So all of these things will flow, but should flow from that primary objective and definition of audience and why.
Joe, do you have things to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything Liz said, and I'll add, for instance, one of the drivers here at Kinaxis not only was for the customers, but it was our main driver was to validate the skill sets of our employees and partners that were implementing our product. We're a one product company. It's one big enterprise platform, and it's very complicated. Implementations take a while, so we wanted to ensure that the people implementing the product were doing it properly. One, to help the customers, definitely, but two, to help our own support organization, not having to pick up the pieces of a failed installation later on.
It's a good point, Joe. The support team probably is also another part of your main customer, main audience that you're trying to serve.
And do you see, just adding to that, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Just adding to that, I'm just wondering how you see, as you're thinking about, when to launch testing and certification, when the organization is ready and why they need it. So that was a good point, Liz, around why do we need it. Do you see most of the time it's internal audiences for the reasons of certifying, people who are doing the implementation, or do you see external audiences like customers or individuals? Does that come up as something to think about?
Joe, do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So that's an interesting question. And I think different programs will have different objectives. So I'm just going to articulate what we're doing here at Appian right now, but I will tell you in some of the other companies that I've run certification programs for, the answer would be different. So I'd be interested to hear what Joe has to say. So for us, we're certifying a job role, an Appian practitioner who is either a developer or an analyst working in our product. And that job role is consistent regardless of whether you're a customer, partner, or employee, so that job role is consistent across customer, partner, employee. So we have the advantage of building one certification program that applies to Appian developers and Appian analysts across all of our different stakeholders. And so we hold all of those audiences to the same standards, and we therefore also deliver all the same training to them. Now that's a luxury. I have had certification programs that only do internals because that job role was only internal. But I find that the job role requirements kind of define what audiences your certification serves.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was at Brocade, we were a hardware company. We sold fiber channel switches. We had companies OEMing them. So it was important to get the externals, but we were more focused on the users of the switches in the data centers. So the IT crowd, the ones looking for all the alphabet soup after their name. So it was a different kind of program. And then when I came to Kinaxis, different audience altogether. There were consultants, more ego-driven, more competitive, looking to advance their skills, move on to the next job, or move up within the organization. So as Liz said, it depends on the company and the situation.
Joe, can I add something to that, Sarah?
Sure.
Because it always happens when I talk to Joe, I get another idea. So end user, when I was at Appian, when I was at Adobe, that product has an end user, someone using the product. So we had to both certify the implementers, but we were talking about a way to certify the end users who are actually using the product. I will say that in my limited experience in that end user area, it is more difficult for people to, for companies to get adoption of end user based certifications, because that's largely a customer. And you need somebody to really drive certification, kind of the chicken and the egg thing. And so that was my general experience, but in a very limited way, that the end user was harder to get adoption of, more difficult.
Do you think that's changed with the digital badging that's happened, where they're looking for, I guess, being recognized in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Actually, you could use some of there are a couple of companies that have made a big business out of badging to help people put that on their resume so that they would be noticed, they would be recognizable to be hired. So Salesforce, for example, I think is a good example.
Oh yeah.
So that's a very good point, Sarah. Yeah.
Salesforce is a great example. And is it Cisco too had a large certification program that was, I forget what it has a name too, but a lot of individuals came to get certified on Cisco. Yeah.
I will say that some of those that go to end users, like the Salesforce end user piece, if I may say so, aren't necessarily the expensive, proctored, and legally defensible form of testing and validation. Joe, am I right with that?
You're right. You're right.
Okay.
There are certifications that are unproctored, but they're still totally valid and they're not easily passed. We have a lot of our exams that are open book unproctored. We'll be moving to more performance-based down the road, but the rationale was we didn't have to build the lab infrastructure for the software for them to run during the exam. They could provide their own. And in our case, a consultant goes on site, they're going to open up the documentation, they're going to get on the system and play around. And that's what we were simulating with our exam environment.
So that's a great segue into the next question around technology stack. You said the words legally defensible. We could even define that, maybe what that means. Not everyone might know. But what considerations, would you advise people who are thinking about implementing certification and testing to think about in terms of technology, and maybe frame your answer around, bare bones, if you don't have a lot of budget, to using a learning management system maybe to track testing and do reporting, to the legally defensible or proctored exams. And Joe, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, again, you have to look at what your program goals are. What are management's or executive management's expectations, and what is the budget as well? You could start simple by delivering exams, depending on your LMS, through the LMS and track. You could get an outside third-party test delivery vendor. There are a number of them in the market that offer proctored and unproctored exams. And then you could go to, or then you have to decide, are you going to allow remote proctoring or force people into testing centers? That rules kind of changed in 2020, obviously. I know we were doing proctored exams and we switched by June to remote proctoring. We've kept it ever since.
And that's
Now with the,
remote proctoring is a video
yes,
to you? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. When we were using one of the larger test vendors at the time. Also, they've introduced AI proctoring, they being the industry, the test delivery partners, and that's a technology we'll be looking at as well, with the candidate sitting there taking the exam and the AI randomly taking snapshots at intervals during the test to make sure that the person that started the test is the one that went through the whole test.
Like it's doing face recognition.
Yes, yeah.
Huh?
So you show your identification and random pictures are taken to make sure you haven't changed bodies and faces and hired someone else.
And I'll define what legally defensible means. So that kind of helps if anybody doesn't know. So legally defensible means that you've both developed your exams following an industry standard to ensure that the exams are relevant, reliable, and fair in identifying defined knowledge and skills. So there's a standard process, and most certification exams, the legal industry, the medical industry, the crane operators industry, all follow kind of the same process. But then the second part of legally defensible is to ensure that there is an environment that ensures that the person taking the test is the person's name who is on the certificate, and that they're taking the test following the guidelines set by the testing organization. So if the testing organization allows for open book, then that's fine. But the testing organization defines what is acceptable, like mine does not. So if a candidate brings something out and looks at them, then they can't take the test anymore and they have to retry because that's a violation of our testing guidelines practices. So that's legally defensible. And then I'll add that in the technology stack, so Joe, you described kind of the testing piece, which is huge, but there's also the candidate record keeping, the item bank, sorry, testing nerd, the question writing bank capabilities and tracking the results against each question for each candidate, tracking the digital badging, tracking. So the technology stack for a credentialing program of any type is not insignificant. We kind of sort of run ours bare bones. We have fully proctored, fully legal defensible exams. We have a very reliable system for banking our questions and recording that information in case we're ever challenged, or so we can make our questions better. But when it comes to candidate tracking and digital, we built our own. And we can do that because our volumes are a little lower, I guess. I mean, they're not insignificant, but they're a little lower. But you can't, and then there's also how did they buy the exams, how they pay for them, and how do you track revenue, and what's the revenue rec? So there's a whole suite of technology stack required just for certification that when you start talking to people who are asking you for a certification program about those requirements, some of them are like, okay, never mind.
So that's a good point about there's the delivery of the certification and the person who takes it through those technologies, but there's the whole side of developing the questions. So is there certain technology that you recommend to develop the questions? Is it mostly still manually, typed in with meetings where people discuss what the question should be and what the answers should be? And then my other quick question around that is, would you advise people to create, you talked about a question bank, more questions than they need so that they can rotate those in and out? So how do they develop them, or what do you see in the industry right now in terms of developing questions, and then how big should the question bank be? I don't know. This one was a hot question, so I don't know. One of you jump in.
I'll start. I mean, exam development, to be legally defensible, follows a process by which you have subject matter experts creating the questions. They go into a bank. They're reviewed, vetted, etc. Once they pass muster, they're put into an item bank. You definitely want more questions than you have on the exam, so you can refresh, update, depending whether you're using a multiple form exam or randomization of questions. There are also tools out there some vendors that have all-in-one situations where you have an item bank, you have item development software where a group of people can get together virtually and build the exam, review each other's questions, things like that. And then, oh, I forgot where I was going. Item development, item banking.
Did you mean they also deploy the exam? They
Yes.
compile it and deploy it?
Yeah, they can deploy the exam as well. And then going back to candidate management systems, some of them will track the item validity. They also give you the candidate's record so you can do reporting and metrics. So that's very important. And
what are some of the tools, like what are some names of tools that do that end-to-end process?
all right, well, Certiverse is one.
People find those.
Certiverse is one that comes to mind. They have an item banking tool. I'm sorry, item development tool that uses AI actually to help generate the items if you want. You can do review cycles, and they also have test delivery. The only part they're missing is something like a Cert Metrics, which is a strong candidate management system.
Okay.
We use Cavion. Cavion has a tool called Scorpion. So, and it is actually an item development, and we can also deliver the test. That's a very nice thing to have, because if you can deliver the test directly out of your item banking, that's also new. That was a bit of a game changer. Now, what we used to do is you develop it in this system, and then they got moved over to your delivery system, and then someone had to take 3 or 4 weeks to validate that the transition happened. That was terrible. Well, now you have direct deployment, and that's a must-have. And ours do that. And then there's also delivery that you can do on your own. So we can deliver exams in our own little testing events. Like we just did one at our end user conference, which we held here in DC yesterday, day before. And then we can proctor them ourselves. So that's another capability that some programs want to look for, if you want the ability to have somebody else proctor it, but also run testing events that you proctor on your own. And there's a ton of tools out there, right, Joe? I mean, there's some very good tools that can meet different business requirements.
Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned, we use Cert Metrics. Our testing data feeds into that, and that also triggers the digital badges. So it kind of coordinates everything all in one. And really explore the different vendors that are out there and see what they have to offer, especially if you're interested in something like a generative AI, large language model processing to build items.
Yeah, so I'll jump to a question that I planned for later, but it kind of lends itself to this discussion right now. We lost Joe,
but I bet you he'll come back.
He'll come back.
Yeah.
If people are looking, oh, I can hear Joe. It's just your camera, Joe.
Yeah, I had to jump off for a second.
Okay, so if people are looking for tools, technology, if they're starting brand new and they've been asked by their organization to implement certification or testing, are there places they can go, like resources they can leverage, conferences that they can go to, or peer groups that they can attend to learn?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. So, Joe and I probably
or
are
should we do what I do and just call you guys?
Well, you can always do that. Joe and I will talk forever about it, because it's a passion. It's been a passion since I started it with not knowing anything about it. And I was taught by many people, so I like to give back. But regardless, there's Association of Test Publishers, ATP conference, an organization. They hold a conference every year that is very well attended, and it's IT, but it's also the medical, the legal, again, the crane operators. I always thought that was an interesting thing, the nurses. So you're learning from the best of the best. And then there is Sedgman. Sarah, you could probably speak to that better, but Computer Education Managers Association. So those two organizations, so when I got started in this, I got thrown in. Basically, my management needed somebody to take on the education organization at Sybase that got thrown to them from the marketing organization. And some of you might remember Sybase, it's gone now, but anyway, many decades ago. I needed to go learn about, because I knew nothing. I'm not an educator. I'm a, process change management person. So I went to these organizations, Sedgman, ATP, and the people there are tremendous.
Awesome. Yeah, and Sedma, now renamed Customer Education Management Association, but for Sedma, there's special interest groups and there's conferences. Same for the other association?
ATP is, what was your question, Sarah?
They have conferences, special interest groups, things like that too?
And then there's one other organization that I haven't had the pleasure of participating in yet, but I do know I consume a lot of their free information, which is TSIA.
Yes.
Another organization that's very helpful.
Yeah, I would also add PTC, Performance Testing Council, for those that do performance-based exams. And there's ICE, that's an acronym, I forget, Information something Exchange, and ITCC.
ITCC, yeah, I forgot about that one.
And in the DC area, there's something called CNG, Certification Network Group.
Okay, that one's an in-person group?
Yeah, yes, in person, but they also have an online form.
ICE is like ICE, the acronym?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're big into security, right? Joe, isn't ICE largely exam security?
Yes, and they've branched out even more now.
Okay. And Sarah, I don't know if this is in your question bank, but I'm just going to make a comment here that exam security, if you're starting a certification program and it is a legally defensible, what we call high stakes proctored exam, then you need to make sure you have a plan for exam security in your program.
I like that you called my questions a question bank. Very relevant, Liz. I do have a question bank.
From way back, Sarah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so lots of resources, and we'll make sure to send those as well with the recording. So if you didn't catch those, we'll make sure to type that. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, feel free to pop it into the chat, and I can fit it in as we're going, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end as well for questions. I have lots more questions in my question bank. So budget, how much should companies budget? Because I get a lot of questions like, hey, I've been asked by the SLT to create testing and certification. And my first question is, do you have any budget? So that's going to kind of dictate how much you can do. So how should people think about budgeting if they're like you, Liz, they've been thrown in and they have to create this? And then on top of that, how long should they estimate it's going to take to create the testing and certification program?
Joe, do you want to start that one?
Oh, yeah. With budget, first of all, get quotes from vendors before you even talk to executives, so there's no sticker shock, and let them know what kind of range to expect, what the expenditures are now and down the road. I used to use the analogy when I was at Brocade. All these people wanted more exams, and I said, all right, every time we create a new exam, it's like adopting a new pet. You got to care for it, feed it, maintain it. In some cases, translate it, whatever, down the road. You just can't leave it there. So this is something that is not ever going to shrink. It's going to grow. It may cost you X now. It's going to cost you X plus down the road. Do you want to invest in that? Number one. And then budget. And what was the other thing besides budget?
How long?
Time.
But when wait, before you go there, when you say cost X amount, give us an idea of what X looks like. Is it $2,000?
No. Five to six figures at least per year.
For how much?
I have a metric that I tell executives that for every exam they want, every time we rev it will cost, depending on how many questions, 25 to 50K per exam, simply to build it. And it's not cheaper once it's built because you have to, every time you rev it, you have to rev the whole exam. And then on top of that is the technology stack, which to Joe's point is in the 5-digit area. And there is an upfront number to implement it. But the number to maintain it every year is lower and is driven by your exam volume. But so there's an upfront implementation cost, there's exam maintenance cost, and then there is the just the volume driven expenses that you pay for your testing and candidate management. Now, on the flip side, these things do generate revenue. If you do invest in marketing and awareness for the certification exam, they do offset the expense by generating some revenue. I'm not sure they generate margin, but they do in part can help pay for themselves.
Yeah, there is some money that's brought in. Also, use the marketing lingo and say it's a marketing ploy. I used to tell the executives when I was at Brocade, think of our exams as commercials. How much would you pay for a Super Bowl commercial? How much are our customers paying to take our 60 and 90-minute commercials and learn all about our products and information? So often certification is a feeder to the training system or training and helps build up the training business. So it's kind of a lost lead item in the fact that few programs typically run in the black as a standalone business unit, but it's branding, it's driving training revenue, and you're bringing in some revenue from the program operations itself.
Especially, I think, too, if you have it linked to a digital badging program, then of course, people are putting that on their LinkedIn and using that. So it's great marketing for the company. And assuming they're not easy to pass, you know, that also will be talked about. So if you're certified, you know, it's great branding or visibility.
Yeah, and you can.
Can I?
Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I just wonder if I could diverge based on something Joe said to a somewhat different topic, but important, particularly as Joe raised it.
Yeah.
So Joe, you said it can feed your training, right?
Right.
Because people who want to get certified want to prepare for the certification, so they'll take your training courses. But Joe, you and I know that there's disagreement within the certification industry as to whether that's the right thing to do, whether the certification entity should be the same entity as providing the training. If that's of interest to anybody, that's a conversation to explore, because I believe it's different for IT companies than, like, let's say, for the medical or the legal industry.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, in terms of timing, how long does it take? So when you think, you know, assuming there's two aspects. One is, of course, if you don't have budget, you can go create test questions, and we'll get to the AI topic in a second, but there's some great AI tools now that can help you even build those, which are an informal test, or maybe knowledge check is another term. There's all sorts of terms that can be delivered through your LMS, or different ways to do testing and track that people are passing. But if a company or organization's decided to go more formal certification, they're going to invest in it. What does the time frame look like? So I've also had this question. Okay, well, we're going to do a certification test. We'll have that ready in 2-3 weeks. No, wrong. So how long should people budget in terms of time to create a great certification exam and release it?
Well, with full cooperation of management and various functions like purchasing, legal, marketing, etc., I've done it in 5 months. From
For one exam.
Right, to get the first, well, actually, in the case of Kinaxis, 2 exams, but Brocade, to get the first exam going 1 month, 5 months. To get the whole program running, not just to build the exam. We can build an exam in 5 days. We've done that.
Yeah.
But that's not the program. You need all the infrastructure, everything else around it.
So tell me just a little bit more detail. So there's an idea to create a certification exam. What's next?
Well, let's say you got you need to build a program framework. So what is your program structure going to look like? What's the big picture? I call it a matrix, diagram, whatever. What is your program going to be? And how are you going to fill it out? Then you need to plan for your testing delivery, your candidate management, badging if you're going to do that. Make sure all those systems interconnect and work properly. And then you publish your exam, and you have to have a marketing plan too
And what
launch it.
Before you can even launch the exam, you have to get all the subject matter experts together.
Right.
And
well, that's part of the exam development. Yeah.
Development. And so how long does that typically take to build out the questions?
Again, I've done it in 5 days. And it's not a brag. It depends on the situation, the scope, the size of the exam, et cetera. But at Kinaxis, we built our first exams in 5-day workshops.
In
using
person?
A formalized process. Yes, in person. That was the key.
Yeah. Okay. And what about you, Liz? What's your perspective on time frame?
I would agree with Joe. So we launched our new certification program in 6 months with 2 exams delivered at our users conference and launched there from point of inception that we needed to do it to launch. And that was tight, but we had a really good vendor. They developed 2 exams at the same time. We had executive level support, and we had a contract. We had the contract in place with the delivery vendor. So all of that contracting work was done a little bit ahead of time. So well, that's actually not true. We contracted with the vendor. So we stood the program up in 6 months, launched 2 exams, and then subsequently built a 3rd and 4th. So, but we got the core of the program stood up in 6 months.
Okay, so I'm hearing a theme: 5-6 months for first exam or first 2.
And not all of that is exam development. Most of it, to Joe's point, is everything around it.
Awesome. Okay, Anu is sending me a question from the chat. I can't see them, so I didn't realize, but there's a question there for us. How would you advise or suggest to apply a certification for methodology versus technical skills? So for pre-sales roles was an example. Liz?
So, not understanding the full context of the question, the first thing I'd say is make sure if you're a vendor and you have a specific area of expertise. My tendency is to say test only on your specific area of expertise, and if it's like Agile. So Agile is an important part of what we do in our business, but I'm not going to certify in Agile. I'm going to send them off to be trained and certified by other people who are experts in Agile because I want to focus on Appian. So first, make sure that the methodology you're certing on is your individual expertise from a return on investment. And then I'm assuming they're asking in terms of the kinds of questions that you might ask. I mean, it's the same. We actually have methodology questions in our technical exams because understanding our delivery methodology that is unique to us versus specific Agile is part of what's required to be a developer. So we will include those questions in our exam. So I'm hoping that answered the question.
Awesome. Joe, next question. When you think about knowledge and skills badging versus a formal certification program, can both live in harmony within an organization?
Yes, it's how you market your program, how you message it. So right now at Kinaxis, we're giving badges for certification, but eventually we'll be giving badges for certain course completions. It's, again, what we'll message, how the badge looks itself. You can differentiate that way. So it's not difficult. It's you set the rules and you have to tell people what the rules are and what the meaning of the credentials or the badges. I wouldn't call a badge for course completion a credential, but what the meaning of the token, the badge is.
So yeah. Can I add to that? Yep. So to Joe's point, there's differentiation. So if you go back to what I said about Our primary audience are customers that are trying to identify skilled resources. You've got to make it easy for them to understand what they're looking at. So one thing that we launched at Adobe and one thing that I have here at Appian is a governance panel. So no badges, anything that can be promoted externally to the organization by customers or externals has to go through this badging governance panel to ensure that we don't flood the marketplace with badges that our customers don't understand, therefore deleting the brand of the higher level standard, which is our certification. So they can live in harmony, but they should live in harmony. They should, in other words, come together and make sense and recognize that the message you want to send to the marketplace, make sure that's very clear.
Yeah, and definitely there's different purposes for different types of testing. So it's very common to have knowledge checks or skills checks while taking the learning, just to check that you're learning the right things, versus now you've learned a whole bunch of skills and you need to certify on it, which gives you a stamp of approval that follows specific criteria.
And if you're giving a badge for every one of those activities, that's great, but not if they're very confusing.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Switching to AI, there's a question about the AI proctoring, which is good because we wanted to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of trends in the industry as well around AI. So Joe, maybe this question for you, because you talked about the AI proctoring. With AI proctoring, is your test IP at risk, considering you wouldn't see any cheating behaviors until after the whole form has been exposed to the tester? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it depends on what type of AI proctoring. I mentioned that we're looking at using the snapshot technology where we're validating the candidate, but there is also AI proctoring where the AI is constantly watching, looking for, excuse me, any kind of violation or abnormal movement, or if somebody does this, picks up the phone or whatever. So if the AI is good, it's as good as having a proctor, but proctors are not foolproof either. At one of the ATP conferences, there was a session on remote proctoring, and they showed an example, a screenshot of somebody sitting taking a test with a remote proctor, and then later on they had little items circled where hidden cameras were pointing at the screen, taking pictures of the item bank. So nothing is foolproof. I don't mean to be negative, but you always have to stay one step ahead of the cheaters. AI can help, but it's still a valid tool that's in the market, and that just in the area of proctoring. AI has other uses as well in certification, which we'll talk about.
Yes, let's talk about it now, because we have 7 minutes left, and I know.
Okay.
What are some of the trends you're seeing or AI tools to help with certification or testing?
Well, there's a company called LearnExperts I know of, Ottawa-based, that has a tool called Leah, which
Thanks for the plug.
generative AI that can build questions. Certiverse is another one that has the capability to create questions. Other companies have their own internal large language models. You don't want to use anything public like ChatGPT or Bard or Copilot, because you're putting your questions in the public domain. That is sacrificing your intellectual property. So if you have your own, if you go out and buy a version of ChatGPT from OpenAI, you put it behind a firewall, it's used only internally, you're fine.
Okay, so you're seeing trends around the development of the questions and then also the AI proctoring. What about, is there anything in between in terms of AI tools to help with review, initial testing, anything like that?
Not that I know of. I don't know of an AI psychometrician yet, which does statistical analysis.
There's an idea.
Maybe Liz, maybe Cavion's got some advances in that area I'm not aware of, but no, that's all that I know about.
I'm
What about-
calling you to find out more about AI, Joe, more than me. The only thing I'll add is I believe that AI is also assisting in localization, right, Joe?
Yes, not very well, but it is.
Yeah,
Because we're going to explore that because we want to localize our exams, and that can be very expensive.
yeah, that's a good point. Is some of the machine generation tools are getting better, definitely, and some of them, DeepL is one I think I've heard of where it's there's some machine learning model too, so it kind of learns from the things that you correct it with,
Okay.
Because still you need the machine and the human to get there.
And the other thing about AI, and I think, Joe, you would agree with me, you can use it to make the process faster, but you always have to put a human in to assess the AI
Yes.
results. We call it mixed autonomy here at Appian. That's our watchword around AI.
Yeah,
I agree. Okay, a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes left. Do all your exams have to have an exam blueprint? This is from the audience. And how do you create them?
Go ahead,
Yes.
Liz.
And we use Cavion as our psychometricians and subject matter experts. And then I love telling people who wonder about the validity of our exams, how they're created. Subject matter experts define what's on the test, how much of that topic is on the test, and what questions we write to those topics.
Joe?
It's a powerful tool. It guides my content development as well as exam development.
And
Yeah,
that's
I would.
Cavion?
Cavion.
Cavion.
Yeah. And
I would
Alpine
agree.
also provides the same services. Those are the two vendors I've worked with.
Yeah, CMS is another one.
Very good. They're all good. These guys are
Yeah.
solid.
Okay, perfect. So we'll make sure that we list some of those too and we send this out. So that was another question. What did you use to develop exams? AI proctoring, examples of tools, Joe? Or tools that you know that do that?
PSI, Criterion. I think
Okay.
Pearson, Prometric. I'm not sure if the two big vendors have that. Strauss, ITS, and I'm missing one. Measure Learning. And then
Okay.
there's a couple of proctoring companies, AI proctoring companies. I'd have to look at the list of exhibitors from the ATP conference. They would have, that would be a complete list of people in the industry.
Yeah, and that's a good plug for conferences like Sedgman. Is it
ATP,
AP?
ATP.
Okay.
Association of Test Publishers.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's why it's great to join these special interest groups and these associations, because this is exactly what all the members talk about. You know, what are the challenges? What tools do you use? You learn a lot peer to peer for sure. It really helps cut down the amount of time you have to do research. Last question is on versioning, because that one's important. Just like building training and you have to maintain and update it. Same thing for certification and testing. So what's the rule of thumb in terms of, and Joe, I know you have rule of thumb in terms of how often you update a certification exam and why you would update it, but what's quick answers on versioning?
Go ahead, Liz. You've done it with a lot of programs.
We tend to completely rewrite our test if we have budget, well, you have to rewrite our tests every 12 to 18 months. The challenge is, of course, our product revs every quarter. So our exams are written to try to be version proof for 12 months. That's a hard thing to do, but we try to do that.
Joe, what's your experience?
In the hardware space, we would, when a new version of the hardware came out and the associated operating system, we'd update the exams. We didn't date stamp them. And we didn't also expire older exams. We just let the market dictate the value of it. Here at Kinaxis, we're looking at, our product is updated quarterly as well. We look every 12 months to do a review to see if any kind of major changes are needed. I mean, Salesforce was the extreme. A few years ago, they were updating every 3 months.
Wow. And then
They
were
make-
people certifying every 3 months or?
No, but they were redoing the exam, so constant exam development.
So we have a process here that I really, really like, and I'm able to do it because our engineering organization and the training organization publish quarterly release training, which is free online. Once you certify on Appian, you stay certified as long as you consume those quarterly release training every quarter. So even though our test might be 6 to 8 months old, the people who hold a current certification have been keeping up with all the new functions and features through that training. If they do not consume that training, they have to retest.
Oh, that's an interesting way to do it. In this day and age when with SaaS, everything's updating fast. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to stop there. We could keep going, I'm sure, for another hour and a half, but it's top of the hour. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us to talk about certification. I assume people can reach out to you through LinkedIn if they have questions. And I hope everyone got great value today. Thanks, Joe and Liz, and it was so nice to see you again and catch up. Take care.
Thank
Take
you.
care.